Hello and welcome to Disc and Dice. Today we are doing an expansion episode all about the latest generation of Pokemon games. If you haven't listened to one of our expansion episodes before, just briefly, what we do in these ones is unlike our normal episodes where we talk about what we've been playing and perhaps a topic and what we're looking forward to playing, and it's a whole bunch of different stuff. We focus on one game, or in this case, two games, and we spoke about that one at length. Unlike the normal episodes, we also get into some pretty heavy spoiler territory. So if you haven't played the latest Pokemon games before, of course, we're talking about Pokemon Sword and Shield, be aware that we're going to be getting into some spoilers later on. We'll try to let you know when they're coming, but they might kind of bleed through into our general discussion as well, just because that's the nature of these episodes. But anyway, without further ado, my name is Tim. With me is my usual co-host, or one of them anyway, Paul.
Hello.
And our special guest for this episode is the often mentioned but not yet heard Shaylah. How you doing, Shaylah?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. For those of you that are long-time listeners, you'd be very familiar with that name. Shaylah is my girlfriend, and we game a lot together. We play a lot of the same games. Often I'm saying, oh, I'm really keen to play this game because I've seen Shaylah playing it. In this instance, I think Paul got Pokemon first, and then I got it, and I loved it so much that I got it for Shaylah. But then we kind of all finished it in reverse order. Shaylah smashed through it, and then I finished it, and then Paul absolutely had to get hopping so we could do this episode.
Yeah, I kind of tore through the story in like a week or two at the point where you'd finished. We should probably also point out that this is quite late in terms of an expansion episode. I think this game came out like 3 months ago. But I guess we had a lot we wanted to talk about, and we didn't really want to do it in the individual episodes. We kind of thought we'd put it all in here. Yeah, I guess a good place to start is everyone's sort of overall impressions before we get into kind of the nitty gritty and the details that we want to discuss. I kind of already know the answer to this, but how did you guys find the game in general?
Well, guests first. What did you think?
I would have to say that it's probably one of the best Pokemon games I've played. Out of every Pokemon game I have played through the years, it's the only one that I've ever finished and gone back to after I've finished it. None have ever really caught my attention enough to do that.
Well, see, that's a glowing endorsement right there, I suppose, if this is the only one you've ever finished. And, you know, ostensibly, I suppose these are kids' games. Like, that was the target audience, at least when they started. So if it's finally caught you now in adulthood, I guess that's pretty cool. I finished a few of them in my time, but I said this on the last episode of Disc and Dice anyway. I think this is the best Pokemon games have ever been. So that I've made no secret of that. But Paul, now that you have finished it, or at least the story, where do you come down?
I'm probably, like Shaylah said, I would say it's definitely one of the best. I don't know if it's the best for me. There's kind of like a red-blue nostalgia that I don't think anything will ever really be able to measure up to. But like, I would say that if you've never played a Pokemon game before, this is unquestionably the one you should play. Like, there is just no reason to go back and start with older Pokemon games for like a number of reasons which we'll get into today. So it's definitely sort of like, it's the best modern Pokemon game as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, I finished the story, and to be honest, I've really wanted to go back and do other stuff after that. I'm kind of a bit like you, Shaylah, that when I finish a Pokemon game, well, sometimes I kind of think, oh yeah, I'll go do a bunch of stuff afterwards and like finish the Pokedex, and I never ever do it. Within like a few days, I just put it down and I'm done. And this time I played a little bit, but I actually haven't, for probably the last week and a half, which is about how long ago I finished it, maybe a little bit longer. I haven't gone back to it at all, which is maybe more a result of sort of real life stuff and other games rather than not wanting to go back. But I would say that there's more post story stuff than normal that I'm interested in.
I 100% agree. I think there's, after what is, I guess you'd have to call it the main story to be clear, there's
Mhm.
so much more to do. But having said that, I felt the drive to go back and do other things more than I have with any other game. Normally, any other Pokemon game, once you're the Pokemon champion, or the league champion, or whatever they're calling it in that particular game, you've bested the Elite Four and all that. Generally, I credits roll and I'm done. In this one, not only was I driven to go back and keep catching Pokemon and stuff and exploring the wild area, which we'll talk about, I also felt the drive to do more before the end of the story. Uh, I want to talk more about catching Pokemon and filling your Pokedex in depth, but that's something that I never really worried too much about while I was playing the story of previous games. I was kind of like, I'll just catch what I catch on the way, and that's fine. And I kind of stick to my 6 Pokemon that I caught kind of near the end that have leveled up a lot. Sorry, near the start that have leveled up a lot. And in this one, I was really motivated to fill that Pokedex, to grab things I hadn't grabbed before. And, I was swapping out Pokemon and stuff, because the way they did the Pokemon stuff was just, I like the wild Pokemon and the encounters, I think was just so much better.
One of the things that got me doing that, and it's not even a change to how the game works, it's just a change to how they present information. When you go to your Pokedex screen, it would often just have a couple of like recommended Pokemon that you haven't caught yet, and they would either be in the zone that you're in now, or they'd just be back in the wild zone, but they'd be around the level you're at. And I found that quite appealing, that the game would just sort of give you a little bit of direction there. Like, if you don't know what else to do, why don't you go and catch these 2 Pokemon that you haven't caught yet? And I found that to be something that I did quite regularly.
Yeah, both Shaylah and I like burnt hours because you'd be done doing whatever it is you set out to do, but you'd see, oh my gosh, that Pokemon's like right near me according to my Pokedex screen. I'll just go and get that one, and then you do that, and it replaces it with
And it gives you another one, yeah.
By the time you've moved, there's something else near you, and you're like, oh, dude, all right, fine, I'll just do that one, and you just keep playing. But yeah, I think let's get into like catching Pokemon and stuff in a bit later, but let's go even more general than that to start with. So we've done our general thoughts. You both think it's one of the best. I think it is unquestionably the best. But let's kind of talk about the aesthetics, yeah? Because one thing I found with this game is all the previous Pokemon games have kind of, after the first few, it was pretty obvious they were kind of trying to base it on real areas. And Sun and Moon was pretty clearly Hawaii because it was like islands,
Mm-hmm.
but it was just, it could have been any islands really. I felt like this region, which is the Galar region, or Galar, however you say it, it's meant to be like England, and I thought they nailed it so hard. And I don't know if that's just because being from, a Western country, I'm more familiar with England and what it's like and what's there and whatnot. But I think they absolutely nailed like the making it feel like Britain.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm kind of unsure whether that's like half because it's on the Switch and they're just able to do it. Like the one that probably stands out to me as the most distinctive of the real world themed ones was the French themed one, which I can't remember what that was. That was either like black and white or X and Y, I think.
I think it was X and Y.
Yeah, that one stands out to me because they had sort of the Paris like city with the Eiffel Tower, and like when you're buying clothes, you're buying like berets and things like that. And there's coffee shops everywhere. One of the Pokemon is like a poodle, and everyone's sort of using French phrases when you talk to them. I feel like that one had a real like strong French vibe because that's what they were going for.
I feel like that one had a strong French vibe, like when you were in a couple of those big cities. But I didn't feel it throughout the whole game like I did with this one. Like, I felt like from the start, you felt like you were in the British countryside, and they had the right kind of Pokemon, right? They had like a lot of kind of the sheep and ram Pokemons, just kind of like
Hmm.
in paddocks and stuff. And then you run across like a dog Pokemon, and it's kind of like was it a corgi or something like that? Like you had the little legs, it was kind of fluffy. It was that kind of, and the names of the cities as well were all like Shires and Worcestershire kind of sounding stuff. And I don't know, I feel like it was like holistically, like the whole thing, as opposed to a couple of big call outs. I don't know. I feel like they really nailed it. Like more broadly than just a few places. And like I guess the French one didn't stand out to me that much, but like I said, it might be because I'm more familiar with Britain.
They're definitely able to get those like with the speaking of sort of the aesthetics by kind of just lowering the angle of your perspective when you're running around the world. They're able to give you like long distance vistas that you couldn't get in any other Pokemon games. So they're definitely able to do the like rolling hills and fields of Britain in a way that in a way that you could never really see from the other games, which is really cool.
True. Now, when we spoke about this briefly, I mentioned before I had played it, I mentioned the change of perspective, and you mentioned what little you'd played. You felt like it wasn't that much of a change; that you were still mostly on top of your character. And I kind of, after I played it, I disagreed with that. I felt like it was a significant change, and you had less visibility of the map per se. It really felt like you were moving through a countryside, not being able to see, all right, my map branches there and there and there. And it was easy to miss stuff, which I found a lot more exciting. How did the both of you feel about that now that you've both played a considerable amount?
I have to say, I would stick with what I said when we talked about it on the regular podcast. I found that I agree with what you said, that it probably is like the perspective is like it's pulled in closer to your character, but it's sort of tilted back a bit. So you can see further ahead, but you can't see as much like around you. So I feel like it's more the perspective is a bit closer to a third person game than it was. Other Pokemon games, you're basically top down. This is kind of like, it's almost a third person game in that sense. I guess my point was that mechanically, it doesn't work any differently. That it's sort of like, it's like the illusion, unless you're in the wild zone, which is something we can talk about later, because you kind of have full freedom there to move around and move the camera. When you're not in the wild zone, mechanically everything works the way it would if you had the same view. All they do is change the angle, which is cool, and it's like, I agree with what you say, it's probably like more immersive. But I don't know, I guess I was a little bit surprised by that, because I thought that watching the pre-release stuff, I thought it was going to be kind of 360 rotating the camera throughout the whole game, and I didn't know it was going to be like locked perspective and then open for the wild zone. But it's not necessarily like a big negative. It's just like, yeah, just sort of my take on that.
I kind of enjoyed going into the wild zone a whole heap more because of being the ability to move the camera around. There were parts in the game where it felt like it was just completely stuck above my character running around, and I found that I was getting quite bored with it. But it wasn't a deal breaker for me, because I found that I was still going back and playing those areas. But definitely having the camera view change a lot more in the wild area was something that I definitely loved a whole lot more, and I think I mentioned that to Tim quite a few times while playing it.
Right, like you're totally right about that. When you sort of like run into the wild zone after a couple of hours of playing through the normal like routes of the game, and you're able to just like spin that camera around and like go in any direction and stuff, it feels like liberating. I would have that feeling of like, all right, I'm in the wild zone now. I can just kind of do anything.
Yeah, and I guess it's like the scenes, the backgrounds, the level design is all really interesting, and it looks great. And they do a lot of, they'll move the camera in certain ways, so it feels dynamic. But yeah, immediately after the wild zone, it can feel a little bit like you're going back to playing any old Pokemon game. Um, should we talk about the wild area now? Like we just mentioned it so many times. Do we want to get into that now, or do we want to keep talking about the design kind of stuff first? What do you reckon? What
I,
are you feeling?
I have got a couple of other things I want to say about the kind of graphics and the aesthetic before we
All
do
right,
jump
cool.
into that.
Yep.
I guess I do want to also mention broadly that like the game looks fantastic.
Mm.
I think one of the things, like, it has a great color palette throughout the whole thing, and some of the way that changes between certain parts of the world is really cool. Like the game starts off just like super 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 green because it's like you were saying, Timmy, it's going for that like British field sort of idea. But then there's an icy snow area which really captures that feeling of cold, and there's like quite a dark forest area which I particularly liked. We might mention that a bit later on. Um, but the place where I think I really appreciated the kind of step up in terms of graphical fidelity and processing power was kind of towards the end of the game when the story starts to ramp up and the stakes get a bit higher. Now, Timmy mentioned at the start that we're kind of just going to talk about spoilers wherever for this game, so that's this. I guess this is your last warning for that. But when you have that final fight against the Pokemon that's kind of like summoned from another dimension or whatever it is, and you have the Sword and the Shield Pokemon fighting with you. You guys remember that fight?
Yep.
That fight was so visually impressive in a way that other Pokemon fights just aren't in any way. And that kind of fight, I think, is where the game really shines in terms of the graphics and things like that. There's the ones that stand out to me were that fight there and the I'm blanking on what I'm calling these, like the in-stadium fights when you're doing the gym battles, that kind of thing.
Yep.
When you like Dynamax your Pokemon and they get big and they do their huge big attacks. Whenever that would happen, I'm like, this game looks fantastic.
I think even just like your normal battles as well have stepped up. Like obviously not to that degree. Like there were certain flagship battles that they put a lot more time into, but the battles when you would have it with, how every Pokemon game you have your rival and sometimes they're like an enemy and sometimes they're a friend. In this one, when you had battles with your rivals, every now and again throughout the battle it would stop and the camera would kind of spin to your opponent and they'd say something. They'd be like, oh, I should have known that you were going to be able to like know which Pokemon would beat this type kind of thing. Or they'd say, you think that's all I got? Check out this kind of thing. Just little things. Like they don't mean anything. They're pretty typical, like, anime little like as if you're watching the Pokemon show and Ash and Brock are just saying stuff. But they added this level of like dynamicness, diamondism. I don't know what the version of that word I'm looking for is, but they added a real element to it, and it wasn't just the rival battles. Sometimes it was like when you were facing gym leaders, when you were facing your Team Rocket equivalents for this game. They really took their time kind of making those battles feel more like you're actually facing somebody as opposed just to, in the past, once you've played, 2/3 of a Pokemon game, it feels like the stats of your Pokemon, the stats that you're facing, and it's just a numbers game. They really make sure you're reminded that this is like a person v person, Pokemon v Pokemon battle,
I'd agree for the kind of more important fights, like you're saying, like the gym leaders and the rival stuff. Although, like, I got really sick of my like annoying friend whenever I fought him and I used something super effective. He's like, "Oh, you figured out like type weaknesses," and it's like, yes, just like the last 10 times we fought. But I actually felt that if we're just talking graphics, I was a little bit disappointed that the graphics of just a standard Pokemon battle haven't really changed that much. It feels like some moves have had a total overhaul and have kind of got the switch treatment, and they get a really big animation when you use them. And then other moves that might necessarily be more powerful just have kind of a slightly up-res version of what we had on the DS. And I guess I'm a little bit disappointed by that. Like, I don't want them to change Pokemon battles so that they're, real time or something like that. I love all the turn-based elements to that. But yeah, I was a little bit disappointed that just a Pokemon battle doesn't look a bit different in a way. I've been annoyed about this for many, many generations of Pokemon. I get so sick of scrolling through the same goddamn text in every Pokemon battle. I just wish there was a way to streamline that and speed it up. You know, when you're grinding for like a certain Pokemon out in long grass or something like that, and there's the text just seems to move so slowly, even when you've got it set on the fastest speed.
I don't know if you noticed this, but some of the Pokemon, like the newer ones, have really good sounding, high fidelity, obviously recorded by a sound engineer kind of sounds. And the original 150 kind of have the same screechy 8-bit mechanical sounds. And I wonder if perhaps Game Freak are very beholden to the original games. And maybe that's why some of the moves look really great and some of them aren't anything because, they're like, oh, well, this is a classic, so we're not going to touch it.
That's an interesting point, actually, because I noticed that, like, and there are certain Pokemon that have proper, like, yells or sounds or whatever. Like, Pikachu has, like, the proper Pikachu from the animated series noise rather than a kind of, like, Game Boy noise. But I think possibly you could be right. To be honest, for me, it's one of the, like, broadly speaking, it's probably one of the negatives against this game for me is that sometimes I feel like it's a little bit too beholden to nostalgia in areas where I feel like we can just move forward. Like stuff like when you go and heal your Pokemon, you get the exact same text and it takes you like 3 or 4 seconds to scroll through it every single time you do it. And like just let me like click heal Pokemon and with one click I'm done. I don't need to like see that text because that's what it was when I was a kid.
Touching on that one, Paul, I went through my settings for the options to stop all the cutscenes because it got to a point for me where I was just finding that most of my time was sitting there reading text and watching the animation for each move, and I lost interest quite quickly. So I ended up turning it off, and I ended up enjoying the game so much more because of it, because I didn't have to sit there and watch each move be, you know, spent on the other player and the text that goes with it. I would flick through it quite quickly. So it's definitely an option if you do go back and play it again to go into those settings and turn it all off. You might enjoy it a little bit differently.
Ah, I didn't know that was in there. That's really interesting. So what is it? It turns off like the move animations?
Yeah, so move animations are turned off, and I think it's the end of the battle. Um, I think most of the talking. I'd have to have a play of it again to let you know exactly what it was, but the move animations were definitely taken away, and there was a lot of like fluffing around when it come to the battle. So you'd walk in, and everybody would you would see it would cut to the crowd, and you could stop that. You'd walk into the arena, and then it'd pretty much be ready for battle, which I liked a whole lot more.
Ah, that's awesome. I'm gonna have to check that out. That's like a Pokemon life hack.
It's funny. I didn't really have those problems, and you'll remember, Paul, from when we played Sun and Moon. I was pulling my hair out at the amount of text and story and stuff. So it's funny that I've gone so hard the other way with this one. I'm just fine with it. Um, and that almost leads into starting to talk story and stuff quite nicely. But I had one more design aspect I wanted to talk about, and that is like the character design, because I feel like in this game more than any other, there's so much more variety in people's appearances, like the human characters. And while it's still got that classic Pokemon thing of like everybody who's a bug catcher, kind of there's a male and a female version of the bug catchers and they look the same. Whereas in the old ones, they all kind of look like the same sort of anime characters. In this one, they've got such a wider variety of like um some of them have like big bulbous noses, and some of them have like really big strong jaws, and some of them are very thin and weedy and stuff, and just really different looking character designs, which I appreciated. Did either of you notice that, or is that just me?
I can't say I noticed that at all.
Oh well.
um, like I didn't notice it, but I wouldn't say that like I noticed. I didn't notice that like all these characters look the same either, or anything like that. It's just it wasn't something that I was just aware of as I played, I guess. The only thing I would say about characters' appearances, and I said this to you guys off the air before we started, there's a kind of a main character in the story that's called like Beady or something like that. And for like half the game, or maybe a little bit less, I was 100% convinced that this was a very old woman who like a grandma type character. And then there's some line of dialogue in it where it's like recognized by one of the other characters that this is actually a young man, and that was a very strange character design for me.
For those unfamiliar that might be listening, the character was very slim with white hair, and they were kind of always looking down their nose, which made their eyes kind of narrow, and they had like long eyelashes and stuff, and they wore this big long kind of purple pinky coat.
Right,
So
yeah.
I can understand that. The only thing that gave me pause is a lot of the time when that character was first rocking up, there was also another actual very old lady character that was kind of hunched over with a cane and also white hair and actual wrinkles, which kind of made me go, okay, maybe that's not meant to be old. But I did think Beatty was a woman for the first couple hours of the game until. So I think Hop, your friend, goes, he's such a jerk, and I was like, wait a minute, hold up.
I was exactly the same with that. Throughout the game, I kept thinking that he was a girl until Opal came along, and then the comparison of Opal being an actual older woman, and then Beatty there. Yeah,
Right. I guess Opal is the one that, if I'm thinking about the thing you said, Timmy, about them having very unique character designs, that one definitely stands out. That looks like significantly different to other Pokemon characters, which is really cool.
Yeah, see, I wasn't even talking about like name characters. I just kind of meant the people you meet as you go along, like random other battlers, people in the towns and stuff. I just noticed a wide variety of character design that I hadn't at least hadn't recognized or noticed in previous Pokemon games.
I definitely hadn't noticed any of that, but the the trainers I did notice their character design was amazing. I think it was Nessa, the water type trainer. She looked great. She had those amazing like electric blue stripes through her hair that really, really stood out. But as for just everyday people, I definitely did not notice them. The only thing I think I noticed was the old guy at the big bath in the middle of the town, like that. Maybe it was like the hot pools. I think he gives you something.
He teaches you a dragon type move.
That guy, he was the only one that I really remembered out of all the normal people.
Fair enough. But perhaps now that we're starting to mention characters and we're mentioning towns and people that give you special things and whatnot, it'd be a good idea to chat a little bit about the story or the narrative for this one.
Sure.
And I suppose now would also be a good time to say, like, we're probably going to not bother censoring the spoilers at this point. So let this be your final warning.
Shaylah, do you want to warn everyone as well?
Okay, guys, just the last spoiler we're going to give you. It's don't write into the podcast, or do, because Paul's usually the one that gets the emails. Direct them all to Paul if you've got a problem with it.
Yeah, if you're disappointed that this game got spoiled for you, it is definitely Paul's fault.
Yeah, don't email the podcast. Like, track me down personally.
So the story for this one has a lot in common with your classic Pokemon story in that you were kind of like, I'd say you're meant to be like 15 or something, right? Sounds about there, maybe 13 at the youngest, but definitely no older than 16. And you're going off to become a Pokemon master. You want to be a champion trainer and all that. The thing that changes this the most for me is that they have really pivoted the Pokemon gym challenge or league challenge or whatever it is to be much more like a sports league. Like the impetus that gets you going is that like your best friend and neighbor, his older brother is the champion of the league. And so he's like wanting to follow in his brother's footsteps. He's kind of always dragging you along, and they see potential in you and they say, here, have a Pokemon, make something of yourself. And so you go off, in the usual way. But instead of it being like you just go to these things called gyms and they're just filled with gym trainers that you walk past and they battle you and then you fight someone at the end, or the last one being Sun and Moon when you do like random weird challenges because they need some certain item from a cave and then they just fight you at the end. This is literally a sports league with brackets and like you are in the current season of it, and each gym has a different challenge you do, and then once you do that you have an arena battle with a whole audience and it's on a sports field with an instant replay screen, and essentially like you're battling people for positions in the league, and if you beat all of the gym leaders then you get to go to the semi-finals and you fight whoever else made it to the semi-finals, and that's some of the gym leaders again, and it's some of the rivals and friends that you've come across throughout the thing, and there's like a whole knockout system. It's televised. Like these are the celebrities in this world. Like very early on you're with Leon, who's the Pokemon champion, and your friend Hop's older brother, and he's getting swamped by the press. And when you beat them, you get like their trading card kind of thing. And I really like that they've just, instead of it just being this weird thing that we do in this world, they've gone, no, these are the rock stars. This is sporting legends, you know, like get inducted into the Hall of Fame kind of situation. Instead of they're just being a random Elite Four and then you're the champ, you know?
Yeah, I really liked that particular thing that you're talking about, the kind of the switch to making it like a sport. I kind of felt like, I guess that comes with the British theme thing that they're doing. It's like Team Yell, the Team Rocket people are like British football hooligans, and all of the stadiums you fight in across are all like football stadiums in England and Europe, and it's got like the sort of the sports league thing going on. I thought that worked really well with that setting, and I definitely enjoyed it a lot more as sort of climactic points along the way. I quite liked Sun and Moon in terms of the story, but I thought the what were they called, like totem Pokemon trials that you had to do, which were the equivalent to gym battles. I thought they were super tedious, and I'm so glad that that is gone. I much prefer this kind of like straight up like Pokemon as sports way of handling the kind of the gym battles each time. And we kind of talked about how they look fantastic when you get to them and stuff like that. So they really feel like big moments. I really enjoy those every time I got to them.
It is interesting though that you say that, because each of the gyms in this, when you get to them, you do have to do a task before you get to the gym battle. And in the first one, because it's like grass or normal type Pokemon, I think it's grass type, you're like herding sheep and you have to get all the sheep to a certain spot. And then once you do that 3 times, it more and more progressively um, increasing numbers of sheep or Woolulu or whatever that Pokemon is called, then you achieve that and you get to fight the Gym Master. So it's not it's not unlike what you're describing from Sun and Moon in its concept. I just think it's executed a lot better, because a lot of those totem things did end up still just being battles. So it was like you had to do 2 gym battles.
Right. That's exactly what it was. And even those totem challenges often just ended up being fight a bunch of wild Pokemon that are often just the same type. So it's like just fight like 5 or 6 of the same wild Pokemon, then fight a really big version of that Pokemon, then fight a gym leader. And this would be like, like you said, they had those puzzles before, which were like super straightforward. Like some of them, I thought they were sort of hit and miss. Like some of them were really cool. I liked the one where you had to change like the water that was falling from the ceiling and stuff to kind of create a path through the platforms. And then some of them were just, there was one where you had to like get points for catching Pokemon or something like that. And I just realized very early on that there was a way to do that where you just didn't catch any. You just like knocked the Pokemon out, and you very very quickly just got enough points. So I thought they were hit and miss, but I think, like you say, the kind of balance between having a little bit of puzzle thing where you do a bit of a puzzle but you fight some trainers, which I prefer more than wild Pokemon, and then you go in and do the sports thing was really good.
Going on the hit and miss aspect there, I definitely feel like there were a lot more misses for me. There was one particular one where you had to kind of make your way through the sandstorm, and the ground would fall. That one was quite predictable for me. I found that each time you would go through it, the maze of what was there was quite predictable. It would just be a different side of where you could go. So on the first level, it would be the right side that would fall over, so you would stick to the left. And then the next side, it was the right that you could go to. It was just quite miss for me for those ones. The one that I really, really enjoyed was definitely the water one. I had fun with that one because I moved around quite a bit, but all in all, those little before ones, they were all quite miss for me. I think I even said that while I was playing. I had you do a couple for me because I couldn't be bothered doing them.
Yeah, that's true. You tossed your Switch over to me and went, "You get me through this bit," like, and not because it was too hard, just because you found it tedious. I was the opposite. I liked just about all of them, and I was quite impressed with how different a lot of them were. Like, there was one where you were essentially just answering trivia about Pokemon or about the characters that you had met. That gym leader, that's Opal. She's looking for a replacement for her gym because she's quite old, and so she's essentially doing a job interview there, but it's during a battle. You have to fight the other prospects, and in between moves, she's firing questions at you to see if you are paying attention, which I thought was kind of cool. And then there was one that's like a top-down one that you're having to, like, you're in like it's like air hockey essentially. You have to press buttons to spin in a certain direction and avoid the pitfalls you get through. And then I mentioned the sheep herding one. You mentioned the one with water falling from the ground. The the level you mentioned with the sandstorm, in my version of the game, that was an ice level or a snow level.
You did mention that while
Yeah.
I was playing.
So,
That.
but that was, yeah, the things falling out. And I suppose, like, in hindsight, what you're saying there was it was kind of predictable. Once you've had to go to the right, it would never make you go to the right again. You'd have to find your way from weave to the left, and so you could progress kind of quickly once you worked that out. But I don't think they were ever so long that it started to get repetitive or tedious. I thought they went, each of them went just long enough. I thought that I got the hang of it, and then before I was like really done with it, it's like, okay, I'm through now. Cool.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Like you're right, none of them are super long, and none of them are not necessarily not difficult, but none of them are kind of randomness based enough that you can fail them really. So you can't kind of get stuck on one because there's just an annoying mechanic that doesn't work for you. You know what I mean? Like you'll get through any of them if you just keep going, and it won't take that long. But yeah, it's just like some of them were just more fun. I liked like you say, the kind of the sort of like like air hockey
All in
almost
all,
slash
they
like
were
pinball.
fun. The ones that I did do and didn't send over to Tim, but they were fun. But I could have gone without.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
I just want to like circle back really quickly to, you mentioned Team Yell before being like hooligans for the sports league. So the Team Rocket of sorts in this one are much less consequential to the overall story than in most Pokemon games, which I kind of appreciated. I kind of got over Team Rocket or Team whatever it is being like an organization hell bent on bringing about something, or destroying Pokemon for everybody or kidnapping Pokemon. That all got kind of samey. In this one, they're kind of just over enthusiastic fans of one of the other competitors in this current round of the Pokemon League, which I found really interesting. It was kind of like, I thought it might quietly be a little bit of a commentary on toxic fandoms, because even the person who they were supporting was kind of a bit embarrassed by them. She was constantly being like, guys, what are you doing? Like, stop harassing these people, being like, I'm sorry. They get excited that I don't know them, kind of thing. And I found that really interesting as the team whatever for this particular generation.
Right, like I expected their like contestant, the girl who's like Marley or Marlene or something like that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I expected she would become like your enemy or your
Yeah.
rival, exactly like you say, just because that's what every Pokemon game does. And I have to say that early on, I really didn't like Team Yell just because, almost because of the name. I just felt like you're really at the bottom of the barrel when you're calling them Team Yell. But like you're right though. Once you probably get past like once you get into like the third act of the story, they get quite interesting, and then they just don't even end up being bad guys. Like they just end up helping you in the end to kind of like solve the final dilemmas of the story. They're just sort of on your side and you're working together. Um, I did like that it took a turn away from, you know, team insert name are the bad guys, and the game ends with you stopping that team with their evil plan.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And what you mentioned about expecting that character to be the bad guy, I felt exactly the same way. And I was really glad that that didn't happen. And I think that is representative of some of the really interesting character building and introductions and natural flow of characters coming in and out this game that the developers nailed with Pokemon Sword and Shield. You'll remember my issues with Sun and Moon is that the whole way through you've got your friend slash rival who's always wanting to fight you, and then you've got the Professor Oak equivalent of that one is always with you as well, and then there's the girl with long hair, the blonde girl in the white dress that is helpless and you're constantly helping her out, and then there's like also this bad guy that uh, you keep bumping into as well. And every time you travel to the next island, you have to go through a battle with your rival. And then the professor stops you to tell you about where you should be going. And then that girl stops you to say, oh, by the way, I need help with this. And because you're on these small islands, you were always bumping back into them again, no matter where you went, which would trigger something else. And so you were constantly doing all of these 4 or 5 things in every new place you went. And it took you so long to get to explore every time, right? In this one, you do have your friend Hop, who's also your rival, who occasionally wants to fight you. And you've got that beady person who's another challenger in the league who keeps rocking up and being like, you're a nobody and I'm going to prove it. And then you're bumping into this Chairman Rose, who's, essentially the commissioner of the whole league. Then you've got also a professor that's investigating the Dynamaxing, which in this game lets you make your Pokemon big and more powerful and stuff, and has given you your Pokedex. But they all kind of like, on your way between cities, you'll bump into the professor and she'll mention something to you. You'll have a bit of a chat with her. And then you'll go on, you'll catch some Pokemon, you'll do some things, and you'll get to the next gym and you'll bump into Hop and he'll come out and he'll be like, hey, I just beat this gym master. You're going to smash him. But hey, I want to try out my new moves on you. And you'd have a fight with him. And then he'd go, that was great. And he'll heal you up and then you go in. And then after you've done that, we bump back into the chairman or whatever. And it felt so much more natural. And I said that'll just happen, but it wouldn't always happen all together in the one town, right? Sometimes it would be you bump into the professor. Sometimes it's Hop. Occasionally you're bumping into Hop's older brother again, Leon, who's going, hey, you're doing really well. I just saw so and so. And I just felt it was so much more natural the way these characters came in and out, and I wasn't irritated with any of it, and I never felt like I was being bogged down with all this stuff to do before I could just go and explore.
Expanding on that part with people coming along, I did really like the conversations that you could have when you would answer questions. So you could either like answer one and you would seem quite humble, but then there was the option to answer the questions like, I already know that. So you would come across, a bit egotistical, and their replies were sometimes varied. So I believe it's Professor Sonia
Yeah.
who gave me. So she would ask questions about, the linens and all the stuff that would come up about those two guys. If you kind of knew what you were doing, she'd be like, "Oh, so I see you already know what you're talking about." And the same with Hop. You'd be like, "Yeah, okay, I'm going to beat you." And be like, "All right, it's on then," rather than the humble approach, which I really liked. It wasn't so much a choose your own adventure, but you could kind of make them seem a bit humble or a bit egotistical.
You've traditionally been silent in Pokemon, and they've always gone, "That's a good point, Timmy." Like, and your character hasn't really said much. So this, yeah, it was a nice touch that you felt. I don't think it had a lot of consequence, but it felt more like you were being the character.
Kind of tangentially related, I like that early on in the game, you're able to skip a lot of the tutorial stuff by using those dialogue things. So I think you get to like the point where usually someone teaches you how to catch a Pokemon, and they say like, oh, I'll show you how to catch a Pokemon, and you can say like, I already know how, and then they just go, oh, okay, that's fine, and then you just skip the tutorial bit, and there were like 3 or 4 little tutorials that you're able to just bypass with those dialogue options, which was kind of like a cool way to use that.
Yeah, I might not have done a very good job of explaining how they brought in the characters nice and naturally, but I suppose one good thing to mention is that once you beat like a gym leader and you met them for the first time, they kind of became an always character in the game. Like you might bump into them again, like just outside of like battling them or whatever, and they'd be like, "Oh, I saw that you're going up against this person next," and rah rah rah, or you know in a bit of side story they're involved, right? And that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like it felt like it had a really diverse roster of characters, but it didn't feel like I was being clustered or forced into cutscenes and stuff like that.
I really like the way that those gym leaders came back at the end for like the finals of the Pokemon League. So you weren't fighting like, it wasn't like the Elite Four, like 4 new people who are super powerful. It was just like you say, you have like the brackets, and you're drawn against one of the gym leaders, and then you win that, and you play the gym leader who won their quarterfinal and stuff like that. I did like the way that those people weren't just, you didn't just beat them, get the badge, and then basically leave them in the dust. Like they would come back. And I know that I haven't done a lot of the post game stuff, but I had started to do. I haven't got the like sword or shield Pokemon yet. You know how there's kind of like the little quests that you go on. You have to like, there's someone like Dynamaxing Pokemons in the stadiums, and you have to go and like hunt, like beat them all. I like that when you're doing that, you're sort of doing that with the gym leaders. It's cool.
Yeah, and because like you only face like 3 or 4 of them in the kind of like equivalent of the Elite Four challenge, like the finals, because the other ones have been knocked out.
Right.
And so then after the game finishes and you play that continuing story after the credits roll, and what happens is the bad guys of this post main story have worked out how to Dynamax Pokemon without a gym leader without a Pokemon trainer and just wherever. And they're going, oh, hey, I need your help. We all need to go up against this one giant Pokemon. It's like different ones as well. So again, it's that diverse roster of characters. So some of them were people that I might have faced in the finals, but some of them are ones that I hadn't seen in a while. And in that, a couple of the Pokemon trainers actually come with you to the different gyms as well. So it really feels like you've now become part of this professional sporting world, and you're recognized, and people, they'll count on you to help, or they might come with you to lend a hand and stuff like that. It is honestly just really well done, and it also makes you feel like, all right, well, this was a scheduled match at the Pokemon Stadium, as opposed to it's really weird that this gym leader just stands at the top of this gym on a 2 meter by 2 meter platform waiting for someone to come along and beat his minions, just. And actually, I think that's something about this world that I really like. They've made it feel like a real world with just slight tweaks. Instead of being like an in-game mechanic, like all of a sudden, they have flying taxis that you can just call from anywhere, um, instead of having to find a move to teach your Pokemon, and then, you summon a Pokemon every time you want to get around. It's just like, now we have a taxi service of these Pokemon that are good people carriers.
Right.
And like, again, the sports league makes it seem more real. You can connect to your box anytime you need to, because like you've just got internet now. If you can send a Pokemon straight to the box when you catch it, how come you can't access that? Now you can. The box link is everywhere. It makes Pokemon management so much better. All sorts of little tweaks like that. I've really made it a much more enjoyable gaming experience for me.
The box thing is like a game changer. It's so much better being able to do that, being able to like catch something and put it straight in your party, or being able to switch out a Pokemon because you suddenly need a certain type to counter something else, or like I'll usually carry around like my 6th Pokemon is just something I'm leveling to evolve, and like when that evolves, just switch it out straight away for the next one that I'm trying to evolve and things like that. It's such a good change. Just back to the story stuff real quickly. The post story thing. You know how you go to like the place where you find the old Sword and Shield, and if you go back there after the story finishes, and there's those like two
dandies,
two like noble dandies who say they're from sort of like the royal family of the Galar region or whatever. And again, like I said, I haven't played through that whole thing, like that whole quest chain yet, but I found them like they're really unlikable, but in like a way that's perfect for this kind of game. I was a little bit surprised that those characters were like put after the main story, where I've got to imagine like the majority of the people who play this game stop like before they get to that. I was really surprised that those guys were there rather than almost being like part of the main quest, because I found they were quite interesting.
Well, I think the key to making sure people discover those characters is that this is the first Pokemon game I've found where you weren't even provided an option to catch the legendary Pokemon from the covers of the 2 games until after the story ended. Like you don't even get that Master Ball in time to be able to try and catch them.
Right.
So I guess I agree with you. They're really great, but the individual who turns out to be the big bad in this game, I think they've done the story in such a way that I'm glad they didn't try to fit this in, or they didn't do those 2 dandies instead of this, because the villain, I use it in air quotes, turns out to be Chairman Rose, who's like in charge of the Pokemon League. And the reason he turns out to be the bad guy is because the chairman of the league also seems to be kind of like the president or the prime minister of seems to have a whole lot of control. And he is summoning this really dangerous ancient Pokemon because he is really worried about there being a finite amount of energy in the world, which I just thought was, and he wants to create this Pokemon to create an infinite power source for everybody because he feels responsible for the people of this country. And I just thought that was like a really interesting motivation for a Pokemon villain, because normally it's like, they just want to summon an ancient Pokemon so they can be powerful or rule the world, or or sometimes it's got a bit of a religious tinge to it or whatever. But this just felt like really timely that they're talking about, essentially renewable power sources and stuff. And I found that remarkably interesting.
On that note, I always felt like, yeah, he was that air quotes villain, but I kind of felt like Elena, his assistant, was more of the villain than what he was. It felt like maybe he was being pushed by her because she wasn't letting people be around him. Yes, he wanted that renewable energy, but she wasn't really helping the situation. She seemed way more, villainous than he did.
Absolutely, and that's just like another level of nuance to, the villains in this game that I think previous games haven't really had.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying, Shayla. Like, I got that vibe from the Elena character all through the game, that she was like Timmy. I agree with what you're saying as well. I really like the way that he's not a villain because he wants to rule the world. Like, it's that perfect villain. He thinks he's doing a good thing and it doesn't go well, but it's almost like her isolating him away from people who might make him see sense or rethink what he's doing means that he kind of believes that his whole plot to bring on the darkest day in order to save the world is the right thing to do, and that she stops anyone from kind of interfering in that, not necessarily because anyone's evil, just because she thinks he needs to work on it and not be interrupted by other people. It's a nice it's a nice way of having a villain that isn't a villain, which is unusual for a Pokemon game. I have to say that probably for the first 2/3 of the story, I found it really generic, and I was kind of like not at all interested. Besides those gym battles, which I really liked, I was just kind of like plowing through the story and felt like this is just any Pokemon game. I couldn't really care less. And then it's at some point it just kind of like clicks over, and all of a sudden it just like everything falls into place, and then it's really cool. And it's sort of like the last few hours of the game just have like plot point after plot point, which I was just really on board with. It was a little bit like Sun and Moon, which I really, really liked the end of Sun and Moon, but I didn't like much of the stuff leading up to that in terms of the story. So I don't know, maybe that's the Pokemon story template.
Yeah, I think like the Chairman Rose story, which is kind of running parallel to your Pokemon League journey in a really nice way. I think like it had that same kind of fake out with how you expected um, Marnie. I think it's Marnie is the Team Yell person to end up being a bad guy. I really liked how that Beatty person, who was kind of like the chairman's sponsored person in the league, he's overly zealous to please the chairman, and he kind of gets dismissed or disqualified from the league early on.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like, all right, first of all, that's really interesting because he felt like the big kind of bad rival to you. And then after that, I thought, okay, well, here we go. Now that the chairman's dismissed him for essentially kind of doing what the chairman wanted him to do but getting caught, now he's going to come back and be the bad guy, because the chairman really didn't seem like he was going to be a bad guy. And again, it's because of that nuance and the really interesting character design. But I expected him to come back, like BD to come back and be like the bad guy now as well. I kept going, now I get what they're doing. And they kept just subverting that a little bit, and not in the way that big twists and going, ha, fake out, ha, fake out. It was just enough that, it kept me really engaged because it's just unlike the kind of story design that a Pokemon game traditionally has.
And the way that BD does come back as the new gym leader replacing Opal is just kind of nice as well. It's not like he gets disqualified and, like you say, he decides he's going to destroy the world. It's like, no, he just gets disqualified and then kind of gets like picked up by Opal as like a protege because she's looking for someone to replace her in the gym. And then when you get to the finals at the end of the game, you fight him instead. I really like that.
I got to say, I love that he does that begrudgingly as well.
Yeah. So the only other thing that I wanted to mention, like story-wise, which is kind of story-wise, is I really liked that you get a Charmander after you finish the game. Because
yeah, I love that.
I liked it for two reasons, because that's like my favorite starter Pokemon from all of the starter Pokemon. But if they'd given that to me earlier in the game, I just would have used that. I wouldn't have, that would have been one of my 6, and I wouldn't have even looked at anything else. I like that you get it after you've finished, and it kind of gives me a reason, like, oh, cool, now I'm going to level this up and get a Charizard. So that was kind of nice. Like, I know there's a lot of Pokemon missing from this game, which has been kind of a controversial point about it, but I did like getting that Charmander at the end there as one of the 150 at least that I get to play around with.
And also the game is balanced so nicely in terms of like leveling up and stuff that you can really level that Charmander up really quickly, even though you get it after you finish the main story and all of your Pokemon are kind of like around the level 70, 75 kind of, right there. If you could grind and get them higher, or you could, stock up on potions and do it with less. But the point is you get him at like a level 5 and you can get him to a Charizard, in only a couple of hours of gameplay, really. But look, that is, we've spoken a lot of Pokemon there. So we might take a really brief break, give you guys a chance to rest those ears for a few seconds, and then be back with just a few more thoughts, I reckon.
Welcome back to this special Pokemon Sword and Shield expansion episode. Now, we've talked a bit about the story, we talked a bit about the aesthetics of the game so far. Now, I think something that all of us kind of want to have a bit of a chat about, and something which, in my opinion, is sort of the big new feature of the Switch generation Pokemon games is the wild area. So I love the wild area. Timmy, you and I have we've talked a little bit on the normal podcast about the wild area or wild zone. I can't remember which one exactly it's called. Yeah, we've had a bit to say about this already, and I guess we've got a bit more to say now. But Shaylah, I'm kind of interested in what you thought about the wild area.
I have to agree that the wild area is great. I think I spent most of my hours while I was playing in the wild area. I think I end up getting up to, I think it was 172 hours on Pokemon. And
Whoa.
I dare say 100 of those hours were just specifically the wild area. I did majority of my leveling up in the wild area. I got my, I think it was Glaceon up to level 100 thanks to the wild area. So definitely my favorite area.
Shayla essentially became my Google, my Pokemon walkthrough, because she'd spent so much time in the wild area. Whenever I was like, oh, I really need one of these, or I'm looking for a Firestone, or where do I go? She was just like, oh, she just glance at my screen and go, oh yeah, just hop on your bike, go across that bridge, and once you cross the bridge, hard left, and it's just look by that pillar. I'd be like, oh, cool. And then she'd be like, oh, and if you want a water stone, you just want to go and dig over there. She told me about like the digging duo that finds stuff for you, like
Oh yeah.
ages before I'd even come across them. Like, yeah, you became a wild zone expert very quickly.
Yeah.
Such was your love for the area.
Yeah. Every aspect of it was just great. And camera angles. I particularly loved the dens. So if we have a moment where I can talk about the dens specifically, I'm all for it.
Say, Shayla.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the dens for a moment.
Yeah.
So the dens are essentially like little raids against massive Pokemon. So you can team up with your friends. When you and I actually linked our Switches a lot and did this, or you can just team up with like NPCs and go against these massive Pokemons, and you get lots of rewards and potentially catch rare Pokemons like a Lapras and stuff like that from doing them. So, do you want to talk a bit about what you loved about those?
I think for me, it was the opportunity to go up against something quite strong.
Mm-hmm.
You could kind of tell who you were going against by the shadow.
You
So
see,
if you know
who's that Pokemon kind of.
Oh
if you know your
really?
Pokemon well enough. Yes, so it was always good. So we would go to our den battles and we go, oh, don't worry, it's just like a Corviknight. We've already got him. Let's go on to the next one.
And even if you didn't recognize the silhouette, it told you the type. It would say this is a water and a flying Pokemon, so that you can make sure you're sending the right kind of Pokemon in there.
Yeah, that was always great. I liked the fact that you could get the watts from it. So when it was lit up and you didn't want to go in and battle, you just go and take the watts from it.
Watts being like a currency that you use in the wild area to buy certain things from traders.
Yeah. You could also throw wishing stars in if you wanted to battle. So wishing stars were things that you would find along the way. So in the wild area, you'd be riding along and you'd see like a little glimmer of something, and you could stop, and it might be, you found a root for cooking, or you found a Pokeball here. There were always different things. So wishing stars were something that you could throw into the dens and create that battle from there.
So the dens, like you can see them from a distance. They're like these red beams going up into the sky. If you throw it, not all of them are active. The wishing star would activate it or make the active ones stronger. Yeah, you can make it into the purple ones, could you?
Yes.
Yeah,
I believe
cool.
so. Yeah. I loved doing the dens for the simple fact that when you would finish the battle, it would really help you leveling up your Pokemon. So I found that to get to level 100 was quite easy for me because I was just doing these den battles. And I think Glaceon was the last Eevee that I think she was. I think I changed her last, and I leveled her up the quickest out of everything that I had.
Shayla had a full roster of evolutions.
I was about to ask, did you
and evolved them all?
Yeah, so you did them all.
Yeah,
I did a couple for you. I got the ones where they evolved by being happy at the right kind of day, so you got to play with them and feed them heaps. And if you did that and they hit the right amount of happiness with you at night, it was an Umbreon, and if it was at day, it was Sylveon. Is that how Espeon?
Yes.
Yeah, something like that. But what Shayla means by it helps you leveling up your Pokemon is that rather than you gaining, you only get to take one Pokemon into the battle, and you don't gain experience in the same way. Like that Pokemon doesn't gain experience for battling, and your team doesn't get any experience for it. But you get items that you can feed to whichever Pokemon you want, and they come in like medium, large, extra large, and they have enormous amounts of XP in it. So you're going up like 3 levels at a time, kind of thing. It's really cool.
Yeah, just on the Eevee thing, I really like using one of the Eevee forms as like a kind of filler Pokemon when I need a certain type and I can't find what I like in that version of Pokemon. You know, because Eevee's in every Pokemon and all the evolutions are there. So for this one, it was like I couldn't find a grass type that I liked in this game. So then I'll get my Eevee and evolve it into like Leafeon because all the Eevee evolutions are so cool that I'm happy to have any of them for whichever one fits my party. In terms of the dens, though, that's really interesting because I didn't ever do any of the dens. I knew I could do them with NPCs, but that just sort of, I don't know, I just didn't do it because it didn't seem that appealing to me. I can see
Still
how
really
having,
worth it, man.
yeah, I can see how doing it with someone else though would be really fun. Like I definitely get the vibe from this that the wild area is endgame for this Pokemon. Like that's where they see people kind of playing around and doing things in groups and playing online and stuff like that. Like I don't have whatever the like online pass is for Nintendo, so I can't go online and do any of that stuff, which is a little bit annoying.
I
But
don't think either of us do, but you can do it with near field communication.
you can, but
Because
you,
we were near, we were able to do it. Yeah.
yeah, you can do it like that, but you just can't like I couldn't play with you guys from here or anything like that.
I have a feeling that like you can do it with link codes potentially.
Yeah, I'm not
But
sure. I looked it up and I for everything I read, like unless you're using the near field thing, like it's all locked behind the paywall now of
okay, gotcha.
paying for like whatever it's called, Nintendo something.
But yeah, if you are you playing with somebody who's nearby you, highly recommend just like you can do so many dens. They're essentially raids, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and we sunk ages just sitting there next to each other doing these over and over again, and it's actually like really quick in terms of like I'm watching myself do something on my screen and it's happening basically in real time on yours, which I suppose like we play MMORPGs like Destiny and stuff together, and so that shouldn't be any huge surprise. But I just because Nintendo and Pokemon haven't really done that very much before, I was kind of taken aback at how seamless it is.
I think another thing worth mentioning about the dens is after you do finish the battle, you have the opportunity to catch the Pokemon, um, or you could leave it if you've got it. The one thing that was the draw card for me for each den battle that you win, you would get experience candies. So you could get 4 small experience candies and 2 extra large and 3 medium. They would put your Pokemon level up. So yeah, I saved up quite a few of those and then put them in there. And if you do want to level your Pokemon up to level 100, it's a surefire way of being able to get it done quite quickly. It's definitely something if you're going to go back and play it, or if you're playing along. I suggest going and doing all the den battles and just getting your Pokemon up so much higher.
You get a rating when you look at the den as well. It'll say this is a 3-star Pokemon and it's a fire type, or it's a 5-star Pokemon and it's a grass type. So you know that you're going to get the extra large, um, the extra large experience candies because it's a 5-star. But perhaps you don't have anything that's good against grass, so you know you're also going to have a hard time finding that Pokemon. Whereas the 3-star one, I'm only going to get medium or if I'm lucky, large XP candies. But I got a water type, so I'm going to be able to beat that 3-star fire type, So yeah, it's good.
Shayla, before you mentioned ingredients for cooking as part of something you were saying about the dens, I wanted to ask you guys about that. Did you do the camping cooking mini game much at all?
I actually did it a whole bunch, and traditionally, I've never liked grooming and stuff. And in some of the other games, it'd be like after a battle, your Pokemon's all beat up and you have to like brush their hair or, rub their belly or whatever, or get the tweezers with the cotton bud and like just prod their wounds. Uh, I I never got into any of that stuff, and the first time I accidentally opened up a camp, I was like, "Oh, great, more of this." But the game suckered me in because I went to somebody who was like, "I can tell you how much your Pokemon like you if you want." And he had a look and went, yeah, they're okay with you. I was like, this will not do. I will be loved, all right. And also because Eevee needed some um, it needed to be made happy by playing with to evolve into a couple of the different evolutions. That inspired me to do it as well. But I realized that cooking for them returns their HP, and cooking well enough gives them XP. And once I realized that it was actually going to give them experience, I was like, all right, I can take some time to do this.
I found myself there's a guy in the wild area where you can buy camping supplies from, and he would sell like a tin of beans or a packet of sausages or pre-made curry to go with your food or mushrooms. So I found myself that each time I was going into the wild area via his spot, I was stopping in and piling up. So I knew that I could make like really good food for my Pokemon.
I always had more food than I needed because it took me so long before I realized I should be cooking. And like I said, I avoided the camp for a while. So I never spent on buying food. No, actually, now that I say that out loud, I did once. I bought a bunch of stuff once. But like, yeah, I was never short on food at all.
Yeah, because I
Yeah.
did camping once in the whole game,
Okay.
and I found it really like I really bounced off it quite hard. Like I'm kind of where you are, Timmy. Like I'm really not a fan of the mini games in Pokemon. Like I didn't really like the grooming. I've never liked I don't even know if it's in this game, but like dressing up. There's like that mini game they
Oh,
had for a
yeah.
few generations where you show your Pokemon like they're like dogs at a dog show and stuff like
Mm.
that. Like I bounced off this kind of like those. Like I yeah, I really didn't find anything I liked in it. But
Yep.
what I do like is that unlike previous games with some of these, it's not at all integral to playing the game. So I was able
Mm.
to just play through the whole game and ignore it. And the game doesn't sort of. I kind of expected. I was sort of worried that it was going to be like, oh, every so often in the story, oh, go to your camp and do this thing because, this is the new mechanic. We want you to use it. But I really liked that it's just like, here's camping. Do it if you want. If you never want to do it, we'll never tell you you have to. And I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think it does have like some small benefits, like you know, there's periods in every Pokemon game where you are like you're at one city, you need to get to the next city, you have a large stretch of wilderness between there, and you keep going like halfway and running into trainers or wild Pokemon and getting your Pokemon injured kind of at that. You need to be high leveled for where you are. And so you keep going back to the city you came from to heal them because you don't want to waste all your potions before you get to the gym in the next city. And you're just going backwards and forwards. Camping helps by you can just feed them food because you pick up so much food along the way, so many berries, so many like other things, roots and whatnot. And so camping lets you get their HP back up without having to use your potions, without having to go back to a Pokemon Center. So there are advantages, but yeah, like you said, Paul, it can be completely ignored and you won't much either.
Yeah, it's like another thing I found was that I just had so much money from so early on in the game that I never even considered that. It's like from really early on, I was just able to buy like 50 of whatever the best potion was, and so I just kind of I don't know, like this is a larger issue I have with this Pokemon and maybe Sun and Moon, is that I feel like they're just getting easier and easier, and sometimes it's like if they had given me a bit less money, I might have had to look for other ways to do exactly what you're saying, and that might have led me towards camping. But because the game just kind of gives you like thousands and thousands of monies really early on, it was just like that was just the easy way out. But that's kind of another issue.
Going back to little things that you could easily miss in the game, did either of you come across the bike challenge? So one of the guys in the wild area, if you would talk to him, he's like, "Hey, you've got all these watts. What do you want to what do you want to do with those? Do you want to upgrade your bike?" You could upgrade your bike, and then from there was a challenge where you have to ride a certain course and hit. I think they're like either big bubbles, and they make you go a bit faster. And it would there were like little challenges, but they're little things that weren't necessarily like game changes, but they were little things that you could pick up if you paid the right amount of attention to those people.
Yeah, I didn't catch the challenge at all, but I did go to that guy because I upgraded my bike once because it lets you go at the double speed for longer when you upgrade it. So I didn't realize I could go back to him and end up doing these challenges. But that is really cool.
I saw the guy as well, like the like Watt Trader bike upgrade guy. Yeah, that completely passed by my attention also.
I another really cool little thing that similar to like the Watt Trader guy with the bikes that I think is really cool, like another kind of little touch of something that has no bearing on the broader game, but is pretty cool. In one of the cities, I was just like having a whale of the time exploring every building because it was like lots of cool stuff in the city. And I was in this hotel, and I walked into one room, and there was a private detective in the middle of solving a crime, and he had his suspects all lined up. And he was like, "I am the great detective Houses," as in like Holmes, like it was a riff on Sherlock Holmes. And he was trying to discover someone had stolen fruit from a bowl or something, and he was accusing all four of them, and he was stumped, and you had to kind of go and work it out. And I went and did that. Like you talk to everybody, you solve the crime and got some reward. In another one of the hotel rooms, there was a fourth wall break with essentially like the developers of the game in there, and they gave me like a they gave me an item that was really handy. I think it boosted how much XP you get from battles or something. There's something really
Okay,
important like that, which was cool.
I didn't know about that at all.
Yeah, like just talking to everybody, there were little things. Yeah, it was really cool.
Was that one of the necklaces?
Yeah, I reckon it
Okay,
was.
yeah,
Yeah, he gave me an item that one of my Pokemon could wear in it.
yeah.
Yeah. That's another thing I did more of in this game, actually giving your Pokemon things to hold. Because when they first introduced that, it was like they could hold berries and they might use them. And all that did was make me frustrated when they wouldn't use them and they're like fainting. And I'm like, you've got a berry to give you health, you know? But yeah, all those items, like all the mini things in this, I feel like, I don't know if they were introduced better or they've just been in the series long enough now that I take a bit more time. But yeah, I feel like I'm getting more out of the smaller things in Pokemon.
Yeah, the hold items you give them. Like I've always really liked that as a way to kind of sort of customize your Pokemon a bit. Like I tend to have the one with like the amulet coin that gives you like double the cash. I tend to have something with that, so if that one gets bought out, I get a bit of extra money. And I like to give my main Pokemon whatever will boost its special type. I do feel like they're going a bit nuts with hold items now. Like I feel like
Yeah.
I had so many by the end of the game, and they get so specific. It'll be like this hold item boosts the power of fire moves when it's like midnight on Tuesdays and things like that. And I was just happy with like it just boosts fire. Like that's enough
Yeah.
for me.
See, that's all I did. I did like quite early on you get those basic ones. So I just gave my fire Pokemon one that boosted fire moves, grass one that boosted grass, and then someone had the amulet one. That was it. That's all I needed.
hmm
But I'm sorry, I kind of like sidetracked us out of the wild area following on from what Shayla was talking about, the bike. Um, were we done talking about the wild area?
Well, look, I think it's good to mention eggs in the wild area. So there's there's a little nursery that you can go to, and I found that you could pop some Pokemon in there. they just hang out there. I'm not sure if they up the experience, but they definitely heal them while they're hanging out in there. So I did a little bit of research on what the nursery was for, and I found that you could actually get eggs. So if you put your Pokemon in there with a different type of Pokemon, they would create an egg, and then you'd hatch the egg, and a Pokemon would come from that. I couldn't be bothered trying to match up who you're going to put with who to get whatever egg. So I found that Ditto was one that could do anything with each Pokemon. So I'd go to the nursery and I'd pop Eevee in there with Ditto, and I'd get an egg. And then all I'd have to do is take the egg. You put it in your party. You have a fire Pokemon in there as well. And you ride around in circles or run around in circles, and then you hatch yourself a little Eevee. This was good for me because I was,
Farming Eevees. Yeah.
I was collecting a lot of Eevees so I could evolve all of them into, a little army of evolutions. So it was definitely a fun little one to go in and explore. I don't think I've explained it very well. It's definitely something that you should go in and have a look at doing because it's definitely fun.
Well, that made perfect sense to me, and I didn't do anything with the eggs, so...
Yeah, I've done it before in, like, other Pokemon games, so, like, using the, like... I've done things, like, with my brother, we'd, like, use a Ditto to make a second one of a starter Pokemon, so then you could trade it back to the other person. So, so rather than sort of having to, like, restart the game and trade them your Bulbasaurs and stuff, you just use the nursery to, like, hatch another Bulbasaur with a Ditto and then trade it back to that person. It's a pretty cool system, and I think it gets pretty involved. But yeah, I didn't get a chance to touch on it in this. I'm just curious, Shaylah, did you have, like, were you using a full party of evolutions?
Yeah, by the end of it, it was just all evolutions. I would swap them in and out depending on what battle I was going into, but they were all pretty high leveled by the end of it for me.
That's so good.
So I just stuck with them.
I'm kind of moving us off the wild area a bit, so, like, feel free to bring it back if you guys want. But I kind of wanted to ask you guys, like, what Pokemon you used throughout the game.
Cool. I am going to bring it back to the wild area, but first of all, I get very attached to my starters. So I took the grass type at the start of this, and he ends up being like a big long-haired drummer. So obviously, I had an affinity to this particular Pokemon, and I intentionally took a grass type because I never do the grass type. So I wanted to commit to that. So I had the grass type starter. Very early on, I caught one of those corgi dogs, which I forget what it's called, but it's an electric type, and that evolved into a Boltund, which is like just a quite lean looking dog that's electric, and that just got really powerful. That one seemed to level quicker than most any of my other Pokemon, so I always kept him in there. By the end of the game, I had like the big the bad guy legendary Pokemon that you can get in the main story, and then eventually I got the shield Pokemon from the cover. But for most of the game, it's the ones you get pretty early on. So in this one, there's like a Blackbird Pokemon, which ends up being a Corviknight, but I can't remember what it starts out. It's essentially the Pidgeot of this game. So I had him in there for ages as a flying type. I had that. I got a water Pokemon of some description, eventually a Lapras. I think I traded it from you, Shaylah, and then I caught another one, so I gave yours back.
Yeah, you gave me the love.
Sure did.
For me, I didn't actually have anything in particular going through. I played my game quite differently to how I imagine most people would play it. So for me, I stuck with my water type. I leveled him up, and when I went along, I'd catch a couple of Pokemon that I thought were cute or looked a bit intimidating. But I played my game with mainly like the one Pokemon, got through the games, and when I got leveled up, that's when I went back and started catching everything because I figured I was able for me to catch those Pokemon with the higher level, so I didn't really bother going in and changing my party up too much.
Yeah, fair enough. I started with the fire Pokemon, so it sounds like all three of us started with the different starters. Um, I really didn't like any of the starters. Like I looked up before what their final evolutions were because I wanted to know what it would look like, and I don't like any of them. And I didn't even level my starter Pokemon to the final evolution before finishing the game. I switched it out for like a different Pokemon. I ended up getting the like fire centipede because
Oh yeah.
I fought against it in one of the gym fights, and I was like, I really like fire type ones, and I thought like that is so much cooler than this crappy starter. I want one of those, and I ended up looking up how to get it because I sort of had it in my Pokedex, but it didn't tell me where I could get it for some reason, and I looked it up, and it's one of the random encounter ones that you have to get, so you can't see it in the overworld, and I had to like grind it out to get it, but I ended up getting that and using that as kind of my main one. And I tried. This is something I started doing in Sun and Moon. I kind of have this problem in Pokemon where I just use original 150, and that's all I do every time I play. So I made a really conscious effort now to use stuff that was new for this Pokemon for Sword and Shield, and so I had like the Corviknight as well, Timmy, which was really cool. I used the sheep Pokemon for a bit just because it was like, just because it so thematically fits the setting. I just kind of was like, it's just a normal type Pokemon. It's nothing special, but yeah, it just kind of works for this setting. And yeah, I had that legendary one you get near the end as well. I can't remember what it's called now. It's got like a cool name, and it's all like spiky and sharp edges. But yeah, I haven't got the Sword and Shield ones yet though, which I would like to
Yeah.
get.
Just going to what you said there about not liking any of the starters,
Hmm.
I think like I didn't mention this at the start when we were talking about all the aesthetic things that we really liked, and I did mention that I liked some of the new Pokemons for the Galar region being quite uh like aesthetically in line with it being Britain and stuff, but not specific to Sword and Shield, just recent Pokemon in general. I think there has just been such a dip in the quality of the new Pokemon being created. Like the 150 seem like the original 150 seems so focused and so different to what we get now. And I think you look at it, look at the eyes and the faces of Charmander, Squirtle, and Bulbasaur, and they have like those really nice kind of like anime eyes. Like there's shading in the colors. They're kind of like triangular, and it looks like someone's gone into that with the vision. Whereas the new Pokemon we get, more often than not, it's like a plain white circle with a plain blue pupil in the eye, and their head is a circle and their body's a slightly bigger circle. Like it seems like they're just crapping them out. And I know we like to be positive, which is why I haven't brought it up before now, but I agree with you that like a lot of the designs of the Pokemon that I hadn't seen in this weren't that great, and it was very lucky that they had Galarian forms of the original 150. So like a Meowth would look slightly different because this is from a different continent, you know, and like this would look slightly different. It'll be like Ponytail was different colors and wasn't a fire type, so it was like pink and purple, and it was like a psychic Pokemon. That was really cool because a lot of the new ones, not so much.
Yeah, I am 100% with you on this. Like, and I think yeah, this is not just a Sword and Shield thing. This has been like at least the last two generations, maybe longer. I feel like they're running out of ideas. Like we get rehashed Pokemon so often, and we're into like household objects now for like Pokemon designed around things, and I feel like Sun and Moon had the parallel universe Pokemon, and there were only like 10 of them in the game, but they were so genuinely unique because they basically just designed like science fiction Pokemon, and they were just like the craziest designs. And I kind of hoped that they'd be in this game and that maybe we'd see a bit more of that. And I am a little bit disappointed that we've kind of gone back to kind of like you said. It's there's the Galar region bird Pokemon, there's the Galar region dog Pokemon, there's the Galar region bug Pokemon, and stuff like that. And I know that some of them are themed, like you said. There's like the corgi themed dog. There's like the squirrel themed animal ones. So they're kind of specific to the region and stuff like that. And like there's the fox, like some of them are cute and stuff, things like that. The sheep, all that kind of stuff. But I don't know, just I feel like they could just let their imaginations run wild with some of this stuff, and they always kind of just fit it to the template. But like you said at the start, it's games for kids.
One thing I did want to talk about, like I mentioned, I wanted to take it back to the wild area, and it's not wild area specific, but it is. I noticed it first of all in the wild area. I wanted to talk about catching Pokemon because one thing that I actually really liked about Sword and Shield is that I think they actually made it difficult again to catch Pokemon. Like in the other ones, once you weren't a kid anymore and you could a little bit more efficiently estimate how low a Pokemon's health was going to get and throw a ball, you're pretty much set. You only needed Pokeballs, and then you leveled up a bit. You only needed Great Balls, and then maybe an Ultra Ball for something really high. But in this, I noticed like I'd get a Pokemon down to next to nothing and throw a Pokeball, it would break out. And so I'd throw a Great Ball, and it would break out. And then I'd look around and realize I'm in a cave, and I'd throw a Dusk Ball, and it's caught like that. Or in the wild area, I'm throwing Ultra Balls at this water type and nothing's working. So I throw a net type and it's caught straight away. And I just liked that you had to actually pay attention to the balls you were collecting and which ones you were using. Because I generally didn't ever use any balls other than Pokeballs, Great Balls in the other games, right? They weren't necessary. And they've made them necessary by making it difficult to catch Pokemon with the wrong ball. And that also goes back to Paul, what you were talking about having too much money straight away and always. I actually had to keep a whole range of Pokeballs stocked because I didn't want to be in the wild area and have to go all the way back to the town to get the right type. And not every city sold every type of ball, so I needed to spend my money when I saw these balls, not knowing where I was headed next.
One thing I will bring to that point was that I found that you were sometimes going up against Pokemon that were either a little bit higher than you, and you would get them down and then use, say a Great Ball or something. I found that I never had that issue because I went in way more leveled up. And it was one thing that you did mention to me that I was doing. I went in after I'd finished the game completely with my level 100, and I had no trouble catching any Pokemon. I barely even had to fight them. I would just walk up to them and throw a Pokeball at them.
Yeah,
I kind of did it the lazy way.
In the wild area, if there was a large level disparity, you could catch them a lot easier. Like that was one thing that took away from the feeling like you were in the world, is that there are a couple of statistic kind of things that you could really game in the wild area with the levels.
I would have to say I didn't use different kinds of Pokeballs a lot. I kind of just I upgraded to the whatever the next one was as soon as I unlocked, and would just buy like 20 or 30 of those, and I pretty much just used them. The reason though that I might not have had as much problem as you, Chim, and this is kind of cool that the game allows this variety, is I have a Pokemon that is like, it's my Pokemon catching Pokemon, and I give it things like sleep and paralyze and the move to stop Pokemon escaping from battles. And so I keep it when I'm going out catching Pokemon, specifically like in the wild zone. I take that one with me and I'll get that out. And when a Pokemon gets low and I know it's going to be like a tougher one because it's high level, I'll put it to sleep before I catch it and stuff like that. So I guess like that's how I got around having to use the other balls, was by using those effects. What I did want to say though is kind of along the lines of catching Pokemon, and this is back to the wild area again because it's like the best part of the game. I really like the weather variety thing and the way it changes which Pokemon are there, and the way that means catching Pokemon is not just a case of sort of like it's something that changes. It's not just I need to catch this Pokemon, so I go here and catch it. Then this one, I go here and catch it. I would find myself approaching the wild area a bit more like, what are the weather conditions right now in the wild area, and that would change how I approach catching Pokemon. I don't know if that makes sense. I feel like I'm explaining that really badly, but in previous games, it was just a bit sort of linear. Like you never had to think about it; you just went to the next Pokemon. Whereas this time, I felt like the wild area determined what I was going to do in terms of catching stuff, which I really like. Like I've kind of very specifically like when the game world affects the way you get the way you play a game.
Yeah, I think previous games, and I reckon this is going back maybe even as far as like Silver from memory, did start bringing in the time of day stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like certain Pokemons would like I'm sure it was Silver because they had that one, and you had in-game clock, and oh no, it would go on the real clock. So if you were playing the game at like 7:30 at night, certain Pokemon would be available and others wouldn't. And then if you're playing at 7:30 in the morning, it would go the other way.
Mm-hmm.
So they have had that on a pretty rudimental kind of basis in the past. But you're right. The way the weather changes in this, and that affects what Pokemon are available. And also in battle, the weather affects which moves are stronger as well, which is kind of cool. You know, like if it's super sunny, then fire-based moves work better. If it's wet, then water moves are going to be stronger, and fire isn't going to work so good, kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's kind of like the end point of that system of just day and night,
Yeah.
things like that. Like I guess what I was trying to say before as well is like it means you can't kind of finish an area and just move on, which I like. You don't sort of start at the left side of the wild zone and move through it, catching all the Pokemon, and once you reach the other side, you're done. You might have to go back because it's a different weather condition now, and yeah, it makes it feel really alive.
Absolutely. Now, Shayla, you mentioned that you have got at least one level 100 Pokemon. I know neither Paul nor myself have got there yet. And I also know that once you're level 100, it opens up a whole bunch of new gameplay stuff that you can do. I've heard the words hyper training. I do not know what they mean. So do you want to tell us like what you can do now that you're level 100 that perhaps we don't?
Okay, so once you hit this level, you can go back to Battle Tower. Now, there's other battles that you can do, and you can earn battle points. Battle points then can be traded for bottle caps. You go over to a guy in the Battle Tower, and you trade your bottle caps to hyper train your Pokemon. So it just kind of maxes out like your agility, your speed, your strength. So that little kind of diagram thing that you have, it
Okay.
helps with that. So the hyper trading will focus on strength. For 25 bottle caps, we're going to work on agility.
Right.
We're going to work on on the strength in this one. So
Does it cap you out at any amount of bottle caps, or can you max every single stat of one Pokemon if you want?
I haven't got that far yet.
Okay.
I've only done it a couple of times because it's actually quite hard to come across bottle caps. I don't think I've found one in the wild, and the battle points are quite hard to get. So you'll only get like 2 battle points.
Okay.
And each bottle cap is worth 25 battle points.
See, that's really interesting because I remembered like you had paid attention to something in game that I hadn't, and you were aiming for getting a Pokemon to level 100 because you're like, then I can go to the battle tower and I can do the battles there. And I was like, that's a bit ridiculous because the levels all top out. So if everybody's at level 100, all it's going to be is a matter of recognizing Pokemons by name so that when it says your opponent is sending out a blur, do you want to switch your Pokemon? You go, oh, that's a water one. All right, here comes my grass type. Or, oh, that's a fire type. Here comes my water type. And that's all you're doing. I was confused. But the fact that you can do those battles to increase your Pokemon's like agility and speed and stuff, and then all of a sudden, if you put it all on speed, you know that your Pokemon's always going to get to attack first. That's interesting. It's like the
It's
next
like a
level
real
of
min-maxing
Pokemon tactics.
kind of
Yeah.
thing.
It's definitely something that I've enjoyed, and that if I do go back to it, busy at the moment, so I haven't actually gone back to Pokemon for maybe a week or two. But it's definitely something that I tend to go to first when I'm playing again. I'll boot it up. I'm going in there. I'm doing a couple of battles and then trying to get those bottle caps just so I can do my hyper training, which is definitely a fun thing for me.
On the battle tower, which I haven't done at all, I went there just to get the what's it like, type null, that Pokemon that you can get there, because I really liked that one in Sun and Moon, but I haven't actually done any of the battles. How does that stuff work? Like, do you just do like, is it just like random battles against random trainers? Like, what's the deal?
So they are random trainers. You go in and you pick your battle team, and you can have it so you're capped at level 50 for a battle team, or you go in, I think it's either capped at 50 or 70 for a single
Ah,
Pokemon, and then you take people on, and it's pretty much like the big stadium battle again, but it's kind of dull. You're in kind of a grey area. It's nothing overly exciting, but you do get to choose your teams going in, and you have your choices of the entire Pokedex rather than just your party. It gives you the options to take everything in.
oh, that's cool. I didn't know that. So it's like you can kind of like try stuff out before you catch it, I guess.
I'm not sure if it's like that you would try stuff out, but I usually look. I'm always going in with my evolution, so I'm probably it probably be a better question for Tim once he gets to that point, because I'm sure he would use different ones, but I'm always going in with the same because I know their moves. I've I've gone and I've bought moves for each specific Pokemon because I know what works for them, and that's what I'm going in with, knowing that I'm always going to win the battles with that.
Right. Okay.
One thing I'm really interested about this is because like everyone's going to be, but like the people that are going to keep playing Pokemon story are all going to, in theory, be pushing towards these really high levels with it capping at 100. And this is the first Pokemon game that's going to have DLC. And they've got 2 rounds coming out. And the first one doesn't come out until mid this year. I went to buy the season pass, and then I realized it was going to be 6 months till I could play the first bit of DLC. So I was like, well, I'm not spending $40 now. I'll wait. But I wonder how they're going to manage with the fact that potentially you're going to have all capped level Pokemon. Potentially, like you could, if you're somebody that's going to play DLC, perhaps you've just kept playing and you're going to have 1 or 2 level 100 Pokemon. You know, is that going to be a factor in what they do for the DLC, or are they just going to be like, oh, well, if you've done it, good for you. You can absolutely tear through this. Just, I'm curious to know how that's going to work.
That's a really good point.
I definitely hope that like all the grinding I've been doing lets me take those level hundreds through and just like obliterate everybody I'm playing against. It would have been like all for nothing.
You're just going to become the new bad totalitarian dictator with your
Yeah.
unstoppable Pokemon.
Maybe that'll be the storyline.
Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Level 100 Pokemons corrupt absolutely.
I would love if a Pokemon DLC could turn you into the bad guy Pokemon.
Oh, that would be my favorite.
Like it turned out those people from the post game that are like heir apparent to the royal lineage
Right.
that you shut down because they were perceived to be the bad guy. If they're actually like the rightful like rulers of the country and they were going to be really just, and you've just like humiliated them and stolen their stuff.
The DLC is interesting though. It's interesting that you brought it up, Timmy, because I guess they haven't really done anything like that before. Like usually with Pokemon, you get the second release of the game, either with like, you know, you get the sort of the third game that combines the two, or they did like the kind of Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon thing. Like recent generations have kind of just gone for that like re-release of the game. I'm way more in favor of this, what they're doing now. Like I don't want to buy the game again and play through the whole story. I love the idea of 2 DLC packs that will take you to like a new part of the world and give you a new little story, and it's gonna like each one expands the Pokedex and will bring in like some of the Pokemon they haven't got in the game yet and things like that. Like I'm looking at that and thinking that that's DLC that I'm definitely in for. Whereas I never ever go back for the second release of the Pokemon game each generation.
Yeah. How good would it be if, like, the DLC is like, because this is like we're in Britain, right? And say this was all based in England, and the next part is like, and now we're going to jump across to Ireland, and then it's just a little bit racist, and it's all like fighting type Pokemon over there.
Or one of the DLCs is Brexit themed. And like all the Pokemon are versions of British politicians and things like that.
It's just like the whole game is based around a referendum, and they're threatening to make the Pokemon centers are going to actually start costing you money to use if it passes.
Or what about they could really complicate it and make us all really uncomfortable by saying that it's like there's a group of people who just want to go back to the original 150 Pokemon and not have all the ones that have been added afterwards. And it would be like all of us people now who are thinking that, I really just like the 150. All of a sudden we're like, are we the Brexiters? Is that us?
Oh. Holy crap, make Pokemon great again.
I feel like this is the point to end our expansion episode.
Look, I think we better before we say something truly heinous. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to this. If you have managed to get all the way to the end, but with these expansion ones, we don't normally expect them to be very long, and this has ended up being longer than a normal episode of Disc and Dice. Such is our love for Pokemon. So, thanks for listening. If there is a game that you want us to talk about in as much depth as this that you think we'd be interested in, feel free to let us know. The email address is discanddice@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter @discanddice, and you can search us up on Facebook as well. But yeah, that'll do it for us. Shaylah, thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Anytime. You're always here in spirit. You're like the most mentioned person that's not a host of Disc and Dice. So you really,
I'm usually always sitting quite close.
You're here in spirit, and also you're usually physically here when Timmy's recording.
All you got to do is sneeze and you're on the episode. And it wouldn't be a Disc and Dice sign off if I didn't awkwardly thank you as well, Paul. Thanks for joining me, Paul.
Oh, well, thank you, Timmy. That's so nice of you.
No worries. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you very shortly for our next normal episode of Disc and Dice, where we talk about games.
Games.